Self-confidence depends on preparation. It has been my greatest pleasure to give lectures and critiques to a large audience of students since 1912, an estimated 6,000 per year. This lecture was not just for high school students, but also for business leaders and employees. If you ask me what I think most about myself, I would say that before I start speaking, I need to prepare myself and speak clearly, and naturally. Have you ever been so absorbed in a speaker's words that every word they say is so interesting and comes from their heart and mind? Does their speech have a warm, heartfelt tone that it touches your heart and soul? That is half the success of their art of speaking. When a speaker is in a strong state of mind and feeling good, they often experience amazing things. Almost every word they say comes out without any prior preparation, and the consequences of speaking become easy and relaxing. The first important reason is, why do people want to study this subject? As mentioned in Chapter 1, when I decided to study this subject, I wanted to become a man of confidence, courage, and self-confidence, and many of the serious mistakes that have been made in the past have been due to this lack of preparation. They wanted to subdue the terrified infantry, the terrible cavalry, fighting with water cannons and unexploded ordnance, and how could they do so? It is therefore not surprising that they, when they were in front of an audience, often did not act as if they were at home. I believe that when I speak without preparation, even when I'm old, I may still be afraid, Lincoln said in the White House. If you want confidence, why not do something to get it? The monk Yone wrote, "Pure, perfect love is the banishment of all cowardice." So, to prepare a rich speech, one must also cast off cowardice. Daniel Webster says, "I think that to appear before an audience with only one thing prepared to say is no different than being half prepared." Why don't we prepare longer speeches? Why don't some people understand what preparation is, and how can we prepare them intelligently and thoroughly? Some people make the excuse that there is not enough time. So, let's take up the above issue and discuss it thoroughly. The right way to prepare. How should you prepare? Read a book? Reading a book can help a little, but it is not the best way. A reader who tries to copy ideas from a book and use them as his own will make the whole speech lacking. And even if the audience does not realize that there are some shortcomings, they will not show a warm attitude towards the speaker. Recently, I taught public speaking to employees of a New York City bank. Usually, in this group of employees, there are many busy tasks, so we often have a problem in preparing words to speak well or doing something that will be seen as suitable for preparation. In their lives, they all have their own ideas, especially confidence and self-esteem, the ability to see things from a different angle than others, and the ability to use their own skills in their careers. So, in summary, according to the actual situation, each of them spends up to 40 years and accumulates a lot of material for speaking, but the problem is that they do not know their own abilities. They usually meet on Friday evenings from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. One Friday evening, a man who worked at a bank on the east side of town seemed to have a purpose, and I'll call him Jackson. He glanced at his watch and saw that it was 4:30 in the evening, but he still hadn't prepared anything to say. He then rushed out of his office to buy a copy of Forbes. While riding the subway to the Federal Reserve Bank where he was studying, he read an article titled, "You Only Have 10 Years to Succeed." What they read now is not because it is interesting or anything, but because they want to find something to talk about in class to fit the time allotted, whatever it may be. An hour later, he stood up and tried to talk to them about the story of an article. What was the inevitable result? They tried to talk about the whole article without summarizing or abbreviating anything. We can say that it was more of a reading of the article, so that it seemed to have no art in it and was looking for a way out, which was clearly shown by their gestures and voices. How could they expect the listener to be interested in what they were saying more than their feelings? They repeatedly stated the article by saying that the author had said so-and-so, which all showed that he had taken it almost entirely from Hobbes magazine and added only a little of his own opinion. So I said to him, "Jackson, we are not really interested in the author of this article because he is not here, but what we are interested in is you and your thoughts. How much of your own thoughts should you express rather than just your own words? You should include more of your own perspective. Why not bring this up again next week? Or read the article again and ask yourself if you agree with the author. If you agree, think carefully about the author's main points and analyze them with your own thoughts. If you disagree, speak your honest thoughts and explain why." Jackson accepted these instructions and analyzed the text again, expressing his disagreement with the author. He stopped memorizing the text to be spoken on the subway as before, and tried to practice using his own thoughts, and his brain began to develop and grow, just like the physical growth of his children, like a girl who grows up day by day, almost unnoticed. When he read an article in a newspaper, an idea suddenly came to him, and what he read was an example that floated into his brain unexpectedly. As he brought these stories up and talked about them with his friends on weekends, they would sink even deeper. Later, Jackson would often bring up his own stories. These were minerals that he had mined from his own mine, like gold and silver produced in his own factory. They start to speak better because they don't understand the author's ideas, and there is no strategy that can help motivate a person to develop as well as the opposing opinion, even if it is not too extreme. It is really as black and white as it is unbelievable between two speeches given later by the same person and about the same subject. It is really very different if we have prepared properly. Let me give you another example of what to do and what not to do. There is a man whom I will call Mr. Gunn. He was a student of public speaking in Washington. One afternoon, he was determined to give a speech in class on the subject of the greatness of the Capitol, and he hurriedly prepared his material by selecting passages from a small guidebook that had just been published, which was very crude and without any clear reasoning. Not only that, he did not quote them exactly as they were in the book. It was as if he had not thought out what he was going to say. He seemed to have no energy, no emotion in his speech, so that it was worthless, unattractive, tasteless, and useless. Speech that never fails. Later, an incident occurred that deeply touched Gen's heart. His car was stolen from a parking lot on the sidewalk. He immediately ran to the police and promised to give a reward if the thief was caught. But to no avail. The police replied that it was an excessive measure to suppress theft. But last week, the police had enough time to patrol the sidewalk with chalk in hand and write on the tires of those parked on the sidewalk, and Gen's car was also fined for exceeding the 15-minute limit. The patrol and tire writers were so busy checking cars that had been parked over the limit that they had no time to catch the thief. This made Gen very angry, and suddenly he had a story to tell, and it was not a story from some guidebook, but a story that had recently happened in real life and his own experience. This incident is considered a virtue that awakened his feelings and confidence to rise as a son of five hands. If we recall the speech about praising Washington, every sentence he uttered was floating and very tense, but this time it was the opposite. Just standing up immediately, he could speak and condemn the police with strong words, as powerful as the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. It was a sentence that was delivered with almost no weaknesses and rarely failed, because this speech had undergone real experience and had tangible results. What is preparation? Is preparation for a speech about writing down a few key points on paper, Or memorizing them? No. Or is it about gathering a few ideas or insights to give in some way? Not at all. It's about gathering your thoughts, your opinions, your convictions, and your inner drive, which you already have. We all get these things from our daily lives, from the moment we wake up, or sometimes even from our dreams. Each of us has a life filled with experiences, and experiences that are buried deep in our subconscious, like pebbles on a beach. Preparation is about thinking, and searching for sharp, compelling words, and then selecting those words and putting them together in a group, arranging them into your own words. It is not difficult. It just requires meditation and determination to achieve this goal. On the day of the Buddha's death, a famous Christian monk and preacher was asked, how did he prepare for such an impressive sermon for such a long time? When asked about this, His Holiness replied, I have no secret. When I have chosen a topic, I write it down on the back of a large piece of paper. I have many of these envelopes. In between reading books, if I come across a good passage that relates to the topic I'm going to present, I cut it out or copy it into an envelope that relates to that topic. I also carry a notebook with me at all times. When I go on pilgrimages, if I hear anything that sheds light on the topic I have prepared, I write it down in the notebook and tear it into an envelope. Sometimes I leave it in the envelope for a year or more. Sometimes, when I need to bring something new to the pilgrimage, I open the envelope and take out what I have been saving for a long time. Depending on the text in the envelope, along with the results of my past research, I have a lot of ideas and suggestions to talk about. When I go on pilgrimages to different places, I often cut out or add to some passages. I do this so that my sermons are not repetitive.
Yale President Brown's intellectual guidance. When Yale University's Divinity School celebrated its 100th anniversary, President Charles Rennell Brown gave a talk on the art of public speaking. President Brown had been preparing his own sermons every week for 30 years and had been teaching his students to prepare and deliver sermons regularly. He was therefore in a good position to offer guidance and advice on this subject, advice that would be of benefit to anyone, whether a monk preparing to give a sermon or a shoemaker preparing to address a labor union meeting. I would like to quote Dr. Brown's advice from The Art of Public Speaking. Think about the subject you are going to speak about. Think about it until it is ripe and fruitful. What you get from it is a good idea that will grow and develop just as an egg hatches, causing the germ of life in the egg to grow and develop. It is best to do this consistently, not wait until Saturday to prepare and then give the speech on Sunday. If a person can gather a collection of facts to speak for a month, or maybe 6 months, a year, before he speaks, he will find new ideas growing out of those facts without end. Then they will grow and develop twice as much. You can think about it when you're walking down the street or sitting on the train for a few hours, when you are so tired that you don't want to read a book. You can think about it at night. I myself sometimes get up. I get out of bed in the middle of the night and write down the thoughts that come to me because I'm afraid I'll forget them all when I wake up in the morning. When you've gathered the materials for the talk, write down the different ideas that come to mind related to the story and the topic that will be talked about. Write down what you see happening in the story. Then you decide to choose it first and write down what all your thoughts are related to the story. Write down all your thoughts on paper. Just a few words are enough, and for each idea to remind you of your memory. Then let your mind think more and more all the time, as if it had never been seen in any book before. Do this for as long as your mind can still work. This is a way to train your mind to be useful. By following this method, you will use your brain to be fresh, energetic, quick, and come up with something different,
have ideas, and take initiative. Write down all the ideas that you think of on paper yourself, without needing help. Those ideas are valuable in showing the opinions of your brain, more precious than gold and diamonds. Write down not only on paper, but also on the backs of old letters, on pieces of used letters, on torn pieces of paper, or on any other piece of paper you can find. This is much easier than writing on a large sheet of paper. Not only is it economical, but it also makes it easier for you to organize and review the pieces of paper when you're ready to organize your thoughts. Write down the thoughts that come to your mind often and concentrate on them. There's no need to rush. This is considered one of the most important ways to benefit the mind of those who have the ability. It is a process that stimulates the brain to grow, to gain, to the power of true benefit. You will find that the Dhamma that you enjoy most and is most effective in encouraging your listeners to live in good deeds is the Dhamma that comes most from within you. It is part of your bones and blood, a thing that comes out of the workings of your brain, the result of your creative energy. The Dhamma that you pick up from there and then and combine will make you feel like something used and has a sour smell, but it will be reheated. The living, moving, and vibrant Dhamma in the temple is alive, walking, jumping, and praising God. The Dhamma that enters the heart of the listener will make that heart soar like an eagle in the sky and attract them to walk the path firmly without getting discouraged. It is the Dhamma that is truly born from the energy of the performer.
Lincoln's speech preparation. How did Lincoln prepare his speeches? Fortunately, we know some facts about him. When you read Lincoln's method, you will notice that President Brown extolled many of the practices that Lincoln used in his speeches for nearly a century. One of Lincoln's most famous speeches is about the sentiment of the prophecy. A society divided against itself cannot long endure, and I believe that no government can long endure. Half the people free and half slaves. These thoughts emerged while Lincoln was engaged in ordinary activities, such as eating, traveling, milking, and visiting the butcher or grocery store as he usually did. Lincoln, a dark gray cloak draped over his shoulders, carried a basket in his hand and stepped forward frequently. His mind was so focused on the speech he was about to deliver that he hardly noticed that his son was walking with him. Many times, when Lincoln was thinking about a topic for a speech, he would jot down a few sentences on the back of a used piece of paper, or on the side of a paper bag, or on some other writing material, and he would keep them in his hat and wear them around his neck. When he had a chance to sit down and relax, he would organize them, write them down, and constantly revise them, trying to organize them into sentences for the public. Before moving into the White House, he had the Constitution of the United States and 3 speeches, and he had nothing else to keep as documents other than these. He entered a dusty room on the top floor behind a store in the state of St. Helena, then locked himself in, isolating himself from all distractions, seeking peace and quiet to compose his inaugural address. How did Lincoln prepare for the Gettysburg Address? It is a pity that these stories are not true to the facts. The true story is more interesting, so I will tell you the following. After the committee had prepared the Gettysburg Cemetery, they held a ceremony to dedicate it as a sacred place of worship and invited Edward Everett to deliver the eulogy. He was a Boston clergyman, president of Harvard University,
a Massachusetts state official, a member of the United States Senate, an ambassador to England, a distinguished Secretary of State, and the most capable orator of the United States. The ceremony was originally scheduled for October 23, 1863, but Everett gave the reasonable excuse that he could not prepare a good speech in such a short time, so he asked for the ceremony to be postponed to November 19th, almost a month later, to give him enough time to prepare the speech. 3 days before the scheduled date, he spent time walking around Gettysburg, especially on the battlefields, to acquaint himself with what was going on there. At the same time, he thought about how best to prepare the speech. He felt as if he had seen a real battle. Invitations were sent to all members of Congress as well as to the President and Cabinet. Most of them declined to attend, but only Lincoln agreed, which surprised the entire committee.
Is it a good idea to ask President Lincoln to speak? Because the committee had not thought of doing so in advance, there was a voice in the meeting that Lincoln might not have time to prepare, and even if he had had time to prepare, would he be able to speak? Of course, although he could speak on the subject of slavery or address the Cooper Union, no one had ever heard him speak on the subject of prayer before, which required a very elaborate and thorough ceremony, so they should not risk having Lincoln speak.
Should Lincoln be asked to speak? The committee doubted and doubted without ceasing, but no one could foresee the future and predict Lincoln's ability to make a lasting impression on the people of the day, from the Gettysburg Address, which had been so long in the making, to the speech he had almost forgotten. 2 weeks before the big day, the committee sent Lincoln an urgent letter of invitation asking him to say something decent. Was it proper, you might ask, to write a letter to the President of the United States in such a tone? Lincoln immediately began to prepare. He also sent a letter requesting a copy of the speech from Everett, the most capable person who would be present at the ceremony. A few days later, Lincoln went to a photo shop, holding Everett's original speech in his hand to read in his spare time. He revised his speech for several days, looking it up and down as he walked around the White House in the war headquarters. He revised it while resting on a leather-covered couch in the headquarters, waiting for the final report. He scribbled it on a piece of paper and put it in his hat. Lincoln spent most of his time thinking about the speech until it gradually took shape. On the Sunday before he gave it, he said to Noah Book, "I haven't written it very well, and it's not finished yet. I've rewritten it a few times, but I'll improve it again until I'm satisfied." He arrived at Gettysburg the night before the ceremony. The small town was packed with people. The population of the town, which was usually only 1,300, had grown to 15,000 in the blink of an eye. There were 6 bands playing, the music was loud, and the crowd sang John Brown's Body loudly and gathered at Will's house where Lincoln was received. The crowd sang his praises and asked him to give a few speeches. Lincoln agreed to the request and spoke a few friendly words in simple language rather than using profound words, which he probably wanted to save for the next day. That evening, he spent time rehearsing his speech, and then he went to stay at the neighboring house of Secretary of Defense Seweb Verte. There he read the speech aloud for Seweb to listen to and ask for his criticism. The next morning arrived, and after breakfast he was still absorbed in that speech, until a knock sounded at the door, inviting him to join the funeral procession. Colonel Carr, who rode behind President Lincoln, said, "When the procession began, Lincoln sat erect on his horse, or rather, in the proper, dignified posture of a high-ranking officer of the army. As the procession moved forward, he sat forward, with his hands by his sides, and his head bowed slightly and 3 steps forward, as if he were deep in thought. Although the time was not long before he was to give his speech, he was still thinking of improving it. Some speeches impressed Lincoln very little, and even if they failed, it was no problem. But when it came to the speech on slavery and the story of the United States, it was united in one and gave him a special power. Why? Because he was constantly thinking about these matters and even felt very nervous. There was a friend of his who was resting in the same room at a hotel in Illinois. He said, when he woke up, he saw Lincoln sitting up in bed, his eyes looking up at the sky and uttering one sentence, "This government cannot long endure if it is still half slaves and half nobles." How to prepare your speech. What topics can you talk about for practice? The answer is anything that interests you. Don't be fooled by the short stories that some speakers try to make you talk too long. The best way is to just pick one or two main points from the topic and explain them clearly. Decide on the topics you want to talk about first, and then think about them when you have free time. Think about them day and night, and then discuss them with your friends, considering them important. Ask yourself what the problems are with those topics, because it's a way to get more information to analyze properly. For example, why are you learning public speaking? And ask yourself, what difficulties do I encounter? What do I expect from this subject? Have I ever spoken to a public? If so, when? Where? What results did I get? Why do I think this study is useful for business people? Are there any men and women I have known who have overcome all obstacles in business or politics to achieve success, most of whom are self-confident, whose manners and speaking skills are impressive? Are there any others who have achieved success but lack these qualities? Distinguish the differences between these individuals and tell their stories without giving their names. If you can stand up and speak with good feeling, energy, and fluency for 2 or 3 minutes, you are doing very well for your first speech. The subject matter to be discussed in public is the easiest because you can gather and refine it from your own observations, desires, and experiences. For other areas, such as your business or career, what have you prepared to say? How much material do you have on the subject? The problem is how to select it. Do not try to be too brief, such as spending 3 minutes on these stories, because if you cut the story short and don't finish it, you will not get good results. Keep your focus on one main topic and expand on it as much as possible. Tell how you got into this business or profession. Was it by chance or by choice? Tell about your early struggles, failures, hopes, and victories. You should tell stories that resonate with people, real-life stories that challenge the norm. Real stories, the backstories of almost everyone's life, told in a humble, non-pretentious manner, will always make your audience happy. They are the raw material for a speech that is almost always useful. Or you can also take a different perspective on the business you are running, such as, what are the challenges? What advice would you give to young people who want to get into that business? Or talk about someone you have had good or bad relationships with. Talk about the challenges you have faced. What are some of the most interesting lessons your work has taught you about the world or human nature? If you talk about the details of your work, your words will easily lose your listener's attention. But when it comes to a person's personality, this is a material that rarely fails. Moreover, do not make your speech a dharma of the well, because the listener will be bored. Make your speech flavored with facts and real stories of ordinary people. Think of the real things that you have observed, and think of the real reasons why you believe that each story you cite is a good example. You will find that stories that have real evidence are easier to remember than dharma of the well, easier to say, and make your speech clearer. Let me quote one of the most popular writers to tell you all about it. This is an excerpt from an article by B.A. Hobbs about the need for managers to have a common representative responsible for the management of the company. Notice that all these examples also have some personal bias. Many of the large businesses and industries of today are large, which were once small individual enterprises, but which have since grown into large corporations. The reason is that in the past, all large businesses were run by individuals, but now all businesses and industries are moving toward large collective enterprises. And even the most energetic and capable of business owners need a manager of high intelligence to be their co-managers. F-13th Lewis Woolworth once told me that he had been running his business alone for many years. Then, as his health deteriorated and he lay in the hospital for weeks at a time, he realized that if he wanted to expand his business as he wanted, he must have someone else to take charge of it. The Bethlehem Steel Company had been under the control of one man for many years. Charles C. had the running of everything. Eugene G. Creech, who in another steel company, there was a co-owner who gradually grew to become the leader of the Bethlehem Company. The growth of this company was repeatedly recounted by Charles. The Osman Kodak Company was initially run by George Osman alone, who was wise enough to appoint a competent board of directors. Even the large canning companies in Chicago followed the same practice when they first started their business. The Scandal Oil Company, on the other hand, went against the prevailing idea of the time, that no one company should be run by a single man, as the business grew. J.P. Morgan, despite his ability to reach the top, still believed in choosing partners of great ability to share the burden. Many other business leaders who were content to run their businesses alone also adopted the modern style of operational management, forcing them to appoint a number of alternate managers to take charge of the process. Some people make the inexcusable mistake of talking only about things that interest them in their professional speeches. Why do speakers not first consider that what they are saying is not for their own enjoyment, but for the benefit of their listeners? Why do they not appeal to the feelings that see their own interests? For example, if they are electricians, will they not tell their customers how to protect their property from fire? If they are bankers, will they not give advice to depositors on financial or investment matters? If you are the head of a women's organization, will you not tell your local audience how they can contribute to the development of the country, giving special examples of regional plans? While preparing, study your audience. You must consider the needs and desires of your audience. By doing this, you have won half the battle. In preparing for some topics to talk about, I would suggest that if you have enough time, you should read books related to those topics to find out what others think and say about them. But please don't read them if you don't feel like you know the topic yet. This is important.
The key to backup power. Luther Burbank said before he died, "I often plant 1,000,000 saplings, and then I pick out the best one or two, and then I throw away the rest." For your first speech, you should prepare a lot and have a variety of ideas. The best way is to prepare 100 ideas and throw away 90, choosing only the best 10. Save a lot of material and knowledge. The more you need, the better. Find something that will boost your confidence, benefit your mind and your heart, and benefit your speech. This is the foundation of preparation, but many speakers still struggle with this, both in public and with casual acquaintances. I have taught hundreds of marketers, advertisers, and quality assurance professionals. Their greatest weakness, I have found, is their indifference to the importance of their products and the necessity of acquiring this knowledge before they can sell them. Many marketers come to my office. After explaining the characteristics of the products to be sold and presenting them in a sales pitch, they immediately show enthusiasm for the products.
Many marketers cannot stand the prospect of learning about sales pitches for a whole week, and most of them cannot even endure 48 hours. In training and educating marketers and advertisers in food science, I have tried to make them food specialists. I have them study projects prepared by agriculturists, such as how much water, protein, carbohydrates, ash, and fat is in each type of food. I have them study the various ingredients that make up the canned food they will be selling. I let them study as students for days until they passed the test, and then I taught them how to sell to other salespeople, and there were even prizes for the best sales pitch. I often meet salespeople who make no effort at first to study these things. They say, "I don't have time to tell the retail stores everything. I'm always busy. If I talk about protein and carbon dioxide, they probably won't listen, and if they do, they won't know what I'm talking about." I say, "You're not learning this for the benefit of your customers. You're learning this for your own benefit. If you know the production you're selling from A to Z, you'll find it hard to describe it. You're like a loaded gun with a strong defense, a strong mind, and a strong mind that you can attack without any resistance or defeat," says Arthur Dunn. Ida Moth Tharbel, the famous historian of the Scandal Oil Company, told me many years ago that once, while she was in Paris, S.S. McClure, the editor of the McClure magazine, asked her to write a short paper on the subject of the transatlantic submarine telegraph. She went to London to interview the head of one of the great European submarine telegraph companies, and she received enough data for the task assigned to her. But she did not stop there. She needed to add more data to prepare a document for the future. So she studied all types of transatlantic telegraphs that were on display in the British Museum. She read books on the origins of the telegraph, visited the telegraph factory on the outskirts of London, and observed how it was made. Why did she need to collect dozens of times more stories than she would need? She did so because she saw it as a reserve of energy. She understood that the vast amount of knowledge she had acquired, although not written into the text, can create energy and enhance the beauty of the text she is commenting on. Edwin James Cutler gave a speech to a total audience of about 30 million people. Yet, on the way home, he confided in me a secret. If he felt that his speech had nothing good to say to the audience, it would fail. Why? Because he knew from his long experience that a truly good speech must have a rich, abundant, overflowing supply of material, more than the speaker had used many times. Summary of the principles in Chapter 2. 1. When you speak, there is something to say, a fact in your head and heart, an internal drive to speak that is almost certain to help you get results. A well-prepared speech, when delivered in public, will always be successful 9 times out of 10 times. 2. What is preparation? Copying ready-made sentences onto paper? Memorizing the key words in a passage or phrase? Not at all. Real preparation is digging something out of yourself, storing it, and letting it grow in your consciousness. For example, Jackson failed because he simply tried to memorize other people's opinions from Forbes magazine. But later, he succeeded because he simply used that article as a starting point for his speech. But in addition, he thought up ideas and examples that were his own. 3. You should never sit down and spend an hour thinking about your speech. A speech cannot be perfected like a steak. A speech is something that must grow. Choose a topic for 7 days before the time. Think about it slowly in your free time. Meditate on it. Consider it. Take it to bed with it. Imagine it. Talk about it with your best friend. Make it the main topic of your conversation. Ask yourself all the questions related to it. Write down all the ideas and examples that occur to you on a piece of paper and try to find more ideas constantly. Think about what leads to the examples that come to your mind at different times, such as when you are taking a shower, in the car, waiting for dinner. This is Lincoln's style and has become the style of almost all successful speakers. After you have used some of your developed ideas, find a book on your topic and read it if you have enough time. Save more materials than you plan to use. Take Luther Burbank, for example, who planted 1 million trees, picked the best 1 or 2, and threw away all the bad ones. Prepare 100 ideas, but throw away 90. The method of using reserve energy is to acquire more knowledge than you need, many times over, the more the better, as reserve energy and a wealth of knowledge in preparing speeches. Take the example of Arthur Dunn, who trained his salespeople to sell canned food, and take the example of Ida Thable, who prepared an article about the undersea telegraph line across the Atlantic Ocean.
Thank you for watching. See you next time.